The wagon lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Delta, Colorado, and Prudence Thorne climbed down from the driver's seat with her muscles burning and her hands blistered raw from gripping the reins for 300 miles. It was August 1877, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street as she stretched her aching back and surveyed the small frontier town that would supposedly become her new home. She had come all this way to marry a man she had never met, a rancher named Thomas Whitley, who had placed an advertisement back east for a bride willing to take on the challenges of frontier life. What she had not mentioned in her letters was that she would be bringing her entire life with her, packed into a Conestoga wagon so heavy that both horses had nearly given out twice on the journey. A small crowd had gathered to watch her arrival, which was not unusual in a town this size where any newcomer was worthy of attention. Prudence was 22 years old, tall and strong-boned with auburn hair that had mostly escaped its pins during the long journey, and she met their curious stares with her chin raised despite the exhaustion that made her legs tremble. She had written to Thomas explaining that her parents had died of fever the previous winter, leaving her with their household goods, tools, books, and furniture, but perhaps he had not fully understood the quantity of possessions she meant to bring. "Miss Thorne." A reedy voice called out, and a thin man in his 50s stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal a balding head shiny with sweat. "I'm Thomas Whitley. We've been corresponding." Prudence's heart sank as she took in his appearance. This was not the vital rancher she had imagined, but rather a man who looked worn down by life, with watery blue eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he clutched his hat. Still, she had come all this way, and she forced a smile to her face. "Mr. Whitley, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." His gaze moved past her to the wagon, and his eyes widened. "Good Lord, woman, what do you have in there? That wagon is loaded down like you're planning to stock an entire homestead by yourself." "My parents' belongings," Prudence said firmly. "I explained in my letters that I would need to bring everything. It's all I have left of them, and much of it will be useful for setting up a proper home." Thomas walked around the wagon, shaking his head as he examined the load. The Conestoga was indeed heavily laden, with furniture visible under the canvas cover and crates strapped to every available surface. He pulled himself up to peer inside, and Prudence saw his face redden as he took in the full extent of her cargo. "This is impossible," he said, climbing back down with visible effort. "I cannot marry a woman who arrives with such burdens. I need a wife who can help me build a life here, not someone who clings to the past with this much baggage. My ranch is small, barely profitable, and I cannot afford to house all of these things. The barn is falling apart, and the cabin has only 2 rooms." The words hit Prudence like physical blows, and she felt heat rush to her face. Around them, the crowd murmured with interest, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding before them. She had spent the last of her money on this journey, had sold everything she could not carry, and had driven this wagon across plains and mountains with nothing but determination and the promise of a new beginning waiting at the end. "You invited me here," she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. "You said you wanted a wife, and I came in good faith. These belongings are not frivolous luxuries. There are tools, seeds, fabric, books, furniture that any household would need. I brought resources, not burdens. Resources that require space and care I cannot provide," Thomas said, and there was an edge of panic in his voice now. "I thought you would arrive with a trunk, perhaps two. Not a wagon that looks like it could barely make the journey. I'm sorry, Miss Thorne, but this will not work. The whole town can see that this match is impossible." Prudence felt her world tilting. She had nowhere to go, no money for a return journey, and no family waiting for her back east. The crowd around them had grown larger, and she could see the mixture of pity and fascination on their faces. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she fought against the tears that threatened to spill over. "Then what do you suggest I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nothing else." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. "Perhaps you could sell the wagon and its contents. Use the money to book passage on the next stage east. I truly am sorry, but I cannot take on this responsibility." "The wagon is too heavy to marry," someone in the crowd said with a laugh, and others joined in the cruel humor of the moment. Prudence felt something inside her break, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the laughter. "Then you're strong enough for this life." The crowd parted as a man stepped forward, and Prudence looked up to see a cowboy who stood at least 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore dusty work clothes and a battered hat, and there was mud on his boots as though he had just come from working with cattle. "Excuse me," Prudence managed to say. The cowboy gestured toward the wagon with one strong hand. "Any woman who can drive a wagon that heavy for 300 miles has the strength and determination needed for frontier life. The problem is not with you, miss. The problem is with a man who cannot see the value you bring." Thomas sputtered indignantly. "Now see here, Lucas Ortega, this is none of your concern. This is between me and Miss Thorne. You just ended things between you and Miss Thorne in front of the entire town," Lucas said calmly. "Which means she is free to hear other options, if she is interested." Prudence stared at this stranger, who had come to her defense when everyone else had been content to watch her humiliation. Lucas Ortega had the weathered look of someone who spent his days working under the open sky, and there was a quiet confidence in his bearing that spoke of competence and strength. He looked directly at her, ignoring Thomas entirely, and she saw something in his expression that might have been respect. "What kind of options?" she asked carefully. "I have a ranch about 5 miles west of town," Lucas said. "It's not large, but it's growing. I've been working it for 4 years now, building it up from nothing, and I've just finished constructing a proper barn with room for equipment and supplies. The house is solid, built to last, with 3 rooms and a loft. I have been planning to hire help for the coming season, someone to assist with the domestic work while I focus on expanding the herd." "You're offering me employment?" Prudence asked, trying to understand where this conversation was heading. "I'm offering you a choice," Lucas said. "You can work for me with fair wages and a place to stay, and you can store your belongings in the barn where they will be safe and dry. In exchange, you help with cooking, garden work, and the lighter ranch duties. And if after some time we find that we suit each other, perhaps we might discuss a more permanent arrangement. But there would be no pressure and no expectations beyond honest work." The crowd had gone silent now, watching this exchange with rapt attention. Prudence felt her heart pounding as she considered the offer. It was highly irregular for a single woman to live on a ranch with a single man without marriage, but it was not unheard of in the frontier where practical concerns often outweighed social niceties. And the alternative was to somehow make her way back east with no money and no prospects, abandoning everything she owned and the new life she had hoped to build. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" she asked. Lucas was quiet for a moment, as though considering his words carefully. "I watched you climb down from that wagon, and I could see the exhaustion in every movement you made. But you stood straight and faced this town with dignity, even when you had to be dying inside. That takes a kind of strength that cannot be taught," Miss Thorne. And strength is the most valuable resource anyone can have out here. Besides, he added with a slight smile, anyone who owns that many books is someone I would like to know better. Despite everything, Prudence felt a small laugh escape her. You could see the books from here. That crate on the left side is clearly labeled, Lucas pointed out. And it's a large crate, which suggests quite a collection. I have been trying to build up a small library myself, but books are expensive and hard to come by this far from civilization. Prudence glanced back at Thomas, who was watching the conversation with his mouth hanging open slightly, clearly not sure how the situation had gotten away from him so completely. Then she looked back at Lucas, at his steady gray eyes and the quiet strength in his stance, and she made her decision. "I accept your offer, Mr. Ortega," she said, "with the understanding that this is an employment arrangement, at least to start, and that I will be paid fair wages for my work." $3 a week plus room and board, Lucas said immediately. "And full use of the kitchen and garden for your own purposes, if you choose to put up preserves or grow extra vegetables for sale in town." "That's more than fair," Prudence said, and felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. She was not going to be destitute and abandoned in this strange town after all. She had found a solution, or rather, a solution had found her. "Now wait just a minute," Thomas interjected, finally recovering his voice. "This is highly improper. Miss Thorne came here to marry me, and I cannot simply allow her to go off with another man without even a proper chaperone. What will people say? People will say that you rejected her in front of the whole town and that I offered her honest work," Lucas said, his voice hardening slightly. "And if you are so concerned with propriety, Thomas, perhaps you should have thought of that before you humiliated a woman who traveled 300 miles in good faith based on your promises." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd, and Prudence saw Thomas's face redden further. He opened his mouth as though to argue more, then seemed to think better of it and simply turned on his heel and stalked away, disappearing into the general store with his dignity in tatters. Lucas turned back to Prudence, and his expression softened. "That was not how I imagined your arrival in Delta would go, Miss Thorne. I'm sorry you had to endure that." "I'm sorry I had to endure it too," Prudence said honestly. "But I'm grateful for your intervention, Mr. Ortega. Truly. Call me Lucas, please. And we should get your wagon out to the ranch before those horses collapse entirely. They look about done in." Prudence glanced at her team and winced. He was right. The horses were standing with their heads down, sides heaving with exhaustion, and they needed rest and proper care immediately. "I don't suppose you have fresh horses available." "I have 2 good horses tied up at the saloon," Lucas said. "We can switch them out and give yours a chance to rest in the wagon bed for the journey to the ranch. It's not ideal, but it's better than trying to make them pull this load another 5 miles. Between the two of them, they managed to unhitch Prudence's exhausted team and lead them around to the back of the wagon where they created a makeshift space for the animals to ride. Lucas's horses were indeed fine specimens, a matched pair of bays that looked strong and well cared for, and they made short work of getting them hitched to the wagon. The crowd had begun to disperse now that the main drama was over, though Prudence could see people whispering to each other as they walked away, no doubt spreading the story of her arrival throughout the town. "Let me drive," Lucas said, reaching for the reins. "You look like you're about to fall over." Prudence wanted to protest, to insist that she was perfectly capable, but the truth was that her arms were shaking and her hands were so blistered that every movement sent sharp pains shooting up her wrists. She nodded gratefully and allowed Lucas to help her up onto the wagon seat before he climbed up beside her. The ride out to his ranch was relatively quiet. Prudence was too exhausted for much conversation, and Lucas seemed content to let her rest. She studied him from the corner of her eye as he drove, noting the competent way he handled the team and the easy confidence of his movements. He had strong hands, scarred and calloused from hard work, and there was a steadiness about him that was deeply reassuring after the chaos of her arrival in town. The ranch, when it came into view, was modest but well-maintained. The house was built of sturdy timber with a covered porch across the front, and the barn was clearly new construction, its wood still fresh and pale in the afternoon sun. There were corrals holding cattle, a chicken coop bustling with activity, and a large garden plot that showed signs of recent tending. It was not a grand establishment, but it had the look of a place that was carefully tended and growing steadily. "It's not much yet," Lucas said, following her gaze. "But it's mine, built with my own hands and the money I saved from years of working other men's ranches. Every fence post and board represents hours of work and planning." "It's wonderful," Prudence said honestly. "You should be proud of what you have built here." Lucas helped her down from the wagon, and Prudence swayed slightly as her feet hit the ground. The exhaustion of the journey was catching up with her all at once, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Strong hands gripped her elbows, steadying her, and she looked up to find Lucas watching her with concern. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked. Prudence tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, I think. I wanted to make it to Delta without stopping overnight, so I pushed through." Lucas shook his head, though there was more admiration than disapproval in his expression. "Come inside. I'll get you fed and set up in the spare room so you can rest. The wagon can wait until you have recovered your strength." The inside of the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large table, a serviceable stove, and several chairs arranged near a stone fireplace. 2 doors led off to what must be the bedrooms, and a ladder in the corner provided access to the loft above. Everything was clean and orderly, though there was a definite masculine simplicity to the space that spoke of a man living alone. Lucas guided Prudence to one of the chairs, and then moved to the stove, where he began pulling out supplies with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to cooking for himself. Within minutes, he had eggs frying and bread toasting, and the smell made Prudence's stomach clench with hunger so intense it was almost painful. "I should be cooking for you," she protested weakly. "That's part of what you hired me for. You can start earning your wages tomorrow," Lucas said. "Today you recover." He set a plate in front of her heaped with food, and Prudence ate with single-minded focus, barely tasting what she was consuming in her desperation to fill the empty ache in her belly. Lucas ate his own meal more slowly, watching her with that same steady regard she had noticed earlier. "Tell me about your family," he said after a while. "You mentioned your parents passed away." Prudence nodded, swallowing a bite of bread. "Last winter. Fever swept through our town in Pennsylvania, and they both caught it within days of each other. They were good people, hardworking and kind. My father was a furniture maker, which is why I have so much of his work in the wagon. My mother was a teacher before she married, and she instilled in me a love of books and learning. No siblings. I had an older brother, but he died in the war," Prudence said quietly. "Gettysburg. So when my parents passed, I was suddenly alone with a house full of belongings and no way to support myself. A woman alone cannot run a furniture business, and I had no other skills that would earn me a living wage. When I saw Mr. Whitley's advertisement, it seemed like the answer to all my problems. And instead you ended up stranded in a strange town with all your possessions and no marriage prospects," Lucas said. "Until you intervened," Prudence reminded him. which I still don't fully understand. Why did you step in like that? You don't know me at all. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I know what it's like to be judged unfairly, he said finally. My father was Mexican, my mother Irish. I grew up being told I didn't belong anywhere, that I was too Mexican for the white settlers and too white for the Mexican communities. When I decided to start my own ranch, people laughed and said I would never succeed, that someone like me could never make it as a landowner. But I proved them wrong through hard work and determination. When I saw you standing there with all those people laughing at you, treating your strength and resourcefulness as something shameful rather than admirable, I suppose I saw a bit of myself in your situation. Prudence felt a rush of understanding and sympathy. That must have been incredibly difficult. It taught me not to judge people based on first appearances or conventional expectations, Lucas said. And it taught me to recognize strength when I see it, even if it comes in an unexpected form. You drove that wagon 300 miles by yourself, Miss Thorne. Most men would not have been capable of such a feat. Please, call me Prudence, she said. If we are going to be working together, there's no need for such formality. Prudence, Lucas repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice, warm and genuine. Finish eating and then I'll show you to your room. Tomorrow we can go through the wagon and figure out where to store everything, but tonight you need rest. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a proper bed covered in clean quilts and a window that looked out over the western hills. Prudence barely managed to remove her boots before she collapsed onto the bed, asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. Her dreams were confused fragments of the journey, of endless dusty roads and the weight of the reins in her hands, but underneath it all was a sense of relief that she had found safe harbor at last. She woke to the smell of coffee brewing and early morning light streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was, but then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up carefully, assessing her body's condition. Her hands were still blistered and sore. Her muscles ached from the journey, but she felt more rested than she had in weeks. The exhaustion that had been weighing her down for so long had lifted somewhat, leaving her clear-headed despite the lingering physical discomfort. Prudence found a basin of fresh water on the small table by the window, along with a towel and a bar of soap. Lucas must have brought them in while she slept, which was thoughtful of him. She washed her face and hands as best she could, wincing at the sting of soap on her blistered palms, and then braided her hair back into some semblance of order before venturing out into the main room. Lucas was at the stove cooking breakfast, and he turned when he heard her enter. "Good morning." "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Prudence admitted. "Thank you for the water and towels." "I thought you might need them. Breakfast is almost ready. How are your hands?" Prudence looked down at her palms, which were red and angry-looking despite her gentle washing. "They've been better, but they'll heal." Lucas set down the spatula he had been using and crossed to a cabinet, pulling out a small tin. "This is a salve I make for rope burns and blisters. It will help with the healing and keep them from getting infected. Let me see." He took her hands in his, turning them over to examine the damage, and Prudence felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the gentle way he handled her injuries. His hands were warm and rough from work, but his touch was careful as he opened the tin and began smoothing the salve over her blisters. The medicine had a sharp herbal smell, but it immediately soothed the burning sensation. "You should wear gloves when you work for the next few days," Lucas said, still focused on his task. "I have an extra pair you can use until these heal properly." "Thank you," Prudence said softly. very aware of how close he was standing and the way his dark hair fell across his forehead as he bent over her hands. Lucas finished applying the salve and released her hands, stepping back to a more proper distance. "Now let's eat, and then we can tackle that wagon of yours. I'm curious to see what treasures you've been hauling across the country." Breakfast was simple but filling, and Prudence insisted on cleaning up the dishes despite Lucas's protests that she should continue resting. "You hired me to help with domestic work," she pointed out, "and I cannot sit idle while you do everything. It wouldn't be right." Together they headed out to the wagon, which looked even more battered in the daylight than it had the previous evening. Lucas climbed up to unfasten the canvas cover, and Prudence directed him as he began carefully unloading the contents. There were crates of dishes and cooking implements, barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, her mother's sewing machine, several pieces of furniture including a beautiful carved rocking chair and a sturdy table, boxes of books, garden tools, seeds, her father's woodworking tools, quilts, clothing, and dozens of other items that represented everything her family had owned. Lucas examined each item as it came out of the wagon, and Prudence watched his face carefully for any sign of judgment or regret about taking her in. But instead, she saw only interest and occasional appreciation, particularly when he opened the crates of books and discovered volumes on everything from agriculture to poetry to medical texts. "This is an impressive collection," he said, carefully lifting out a leather-bound volume. "I've only seen libraries like this in wealthy homes back east. My mother believed that education was the greatest gift she could give me," Prudence explained. "She used some of her teaching salary every month to order books, and my father built shelves to hold them all. I couldn't bear to leave them behind." "I'm glad you didn't," Lucas said sincerely. "Would you mind if I borrowed some of them? I've been hungry for new reading material." "Of course not. That's what books are for, to be read and shared." They worked through the morning, carrying everything into the barn and organizing it in a way that would keep things protected from weather and vermin. Lucas had indeed built a spacious barn with plenty of room for storage, and Prudence found herself impressed by the quality of his craftsmanship. Every joint was solid, every board carefully placed, and the whole structure spoke of someone who took pride in doing things properly. "You're a skilled carpenter," she observed as they settled the last of the furniture into place. "My first job was working for a builder in Kansas," Lucas said. "I was 14 and desperate for work, and he took a chance on me despite my age and background. He was a good man who taught me the value of doing things right the first time. Everything I know about construction I learned from him." "What brought you to Colorado?" Lucas leaned against one of the support posts, looking out through the barn doors at the land beyond. "I wanted to own something of my own. In Kansas, I was always going to be just a worker, someone hired to build other people's dreams. But out here, land was available for homesteading if you were willing to work for it. I filed my claim 4 years ago and have been building this ranch piece by piece ever since. It's been hard work, and there have been times when I wasn't sure I would make it, but every season gets a little bit better." "You should be proud," Prudence said. "This is a remarkable achievement for someone your age. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 25. "And you're 22, if your letter to Thomas was accurate." Prudence felt herself flush slightly, having momentarily forgotten that Lucas would have heard her age discussed during the previous day's disaster. "That's right. Old enough to be considered a spinster back east, which was another reason I was so eager to accept a marriage proposal, even from a stranger." 22 is hardly a spinster," Lucas said, "and any man who would judge you based on age rather than character is a fool." They returned to the house for lunch, and Prudence insisted on preparing the meal this time. Lucas had a well-stocked pantry, and she was able to put together a proper dinner with fried potatoes, beans, and fresh bread. Cooking in his kitchen felt strange at first, an intimacy that spoke of domestic partnership. But Lucas was easy to work around, moving out of her way when needed and offering help without being asked. Over the following weeks, Prudence settled into a routine at the ranch. She woke early to prepare breakfast, tended the garden and chickens, did laundry and mending, cooked meals, and helped Lucas with the lighter ranch work like feeding cattle and maintaining equipment. Her hands healed gradually, the blisters fading into calluses that spoke of honest labor. Lucas was an easy person to work for, never demanding or harsh, and he treated her with a respect that she had not experienced from most men she had known. They fell into the habit of spending evenings together on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills while they talked about everything and nothing. Prudence learned that Lucas had taught himself to read at 16, borrowing books from anyone who would lend them and studying by candlelight after long days of physical labor. He had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that often caught her by surprise, making her laugh at unexpected moments. Lucas learned that Prudence had wanted to become a teacher like her mother, but had been denied the opportunity because the local school board did not believe in hiring unmarried women. She had a gift for mathematics and had helped her father with bookkeeping for his business, managing accounts and tracking expenses with careful precision. She loved poetry and could recite long passages from memory, her voice taking on a musical quality as she spoke the carefully crafted lines. Prudence found herself looking forward to these evening conversations more than she cared to admit. There was something deeply comfortable about sitting beside Lucas in the gathering darkness, the day's work behind them, and the night stretching out peacefully ahead. He was unlike any man she had known before, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions rather than just her ability to perform domestic duties. When she spoke, he listened with his full attention, asking thoughtful questions and remembering details from previous conversations. One evening in late September, after they had been working together for nearly 6 weeks, Prudence brought out one of her mother's quilts and settled into her father's rocking chair on the porch to do some mending by the fading light. Lucas was working on repairing a saddle, his strong hands moving with practiced competence as he replaced worn leather straps. "Tell me about your parents," Prudence said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You mentioned your father was Mexican and your mother was Irish, but you haven't said much beyond that." Lucas was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the leather. "My father was a vaquero, one of the best horsemen in New Mexico. He could do things with a rope and a horse that seemed like magic. My mother was the daughter of an Irish immigrant who owned a boarding house in Santa Fe. They met when my father came to town with a cattle drive, and according to family stories, they fell in love at first sight. Her father was furious and disowned her when she married my father, said she was throwing away her future on a man who would never amount to anything. That must have been painful for her," Prudence said softly. "I think it was, though she never spoke of it much. She loved my father deeply, and they built a good life together despite the prejudice they faced from both sides of their families. They taught me to be proud of who I am, to never let anyone make me feel lesser because of my heritage. My father died when I was 12, thrown from a horse during a storm. My mother followed him 2 years later. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think she died of a broken heart. After that, I was on my own." Prudence felt tears prick her eyes at the matter-of-fact way Lucas spoke of such tragedy. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. That must have been incredibly hard." "It was," Lucas admitted, but it also taught me to be self-reliant and to value the relationships I do have. When you've lost people you love, you learn not to take anyone for granted. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about loss and resilience. Then Lucas set aside the saddle and looked over at her. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "Of course." "Why did you agree to marry Thomas Whitley without meeting him first? You're smart, capable, and beautiful. Surely you must have had other options." Prudence felt her cheeks warm at his casual compliment. "You would think so, but the truth is that options are very limited for a woman in my position. I had no family, no income, and no training for any profession that would support me. The house and its contents were valuable, but I couldn't access that value without selling everything, and I couldn't bear to part with the things that represented my family's history. When I saw Thomas's advertisement, it seemed like a way to build a new life while keeping the possessions that mattered to me. I thought I could make it work, that compatibility could grow from shared goals and mutual respect even without romantic love." "And what do you think now?" Lucas asked. Prudence considered the question carefully. "I think I was desperate and foolish, and I'm profoundly grateful that Thomas rejected me, because otherwise I would be stuck in a marriage with a man who saw me as a burden rather than a partner. I'm grateful that you were there and that you offered me another option, one that has turned out to be far better than what I had planned." Lucas held her gaze, and something in his expression made Prudence's breath catch. "I'm grateful too," he said quietly. "This ranch has felt more like a home in the past 6 weeks than it ever did before you arrived. I didn't realize how lonely I had been until I had someone to share meals and conversations with." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Prudence was afraid to name. Then Lucas looked away, breaking the spell, and picked up the saddle again. "It's getting dark. We should head inside." That night, lying in her narrow bed, Prudence found herself unable to sleep. She kept replaying the conversation, the way Lucas had looked at her. The warmth in his voice when he said her presence had made his house feel like a home. She had been so focused on survival and practicality that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing steadily since her arrival. But now, in the darkness, she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with Lucas Ortega. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had come to Colorado expecting an arranged marriage based on practical considerations, not genuine affection. She had been prepared to build a partnership with Thomas Whitley, to make the best of a situation born of necessity. But what she felt for Lucas was entirely different. It was the quickening of her pulse when he entered a room, the way she found herself watching him work and admiring the competent strength of his movements, the sound of his laugh that made her heart feel lighter, the conversations that left her feeling understood in a way she had never experienced before. But Lucas had offered her employment, not courtship. He had been clear that any more permanent arrangement would only be discussed if they found they suited each other after working together. She had no way of knowing if he felt anything beyond respect and companionship, and she was terrified of misreading the situation and ruining the comfortable relationship they had built. Over the next few weeks, Prudence tried to continue as normal, but she found herself increasingly aware of Lucas's proximity. When they worked side by side in the kitchen, she noticed the breadth of his shoulders and the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck. When he came in from working with the cattle, dusty and tired but still wearing that easy smile, she felt her heart skip. And during their evening conversations, she caught herself watching his face, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed and the thoughtful expression he wore when considering a difficult question. If Lucas noticed the change in her, he gave no sign. He continued to treat her with the same friendly respect, though sometimes she thought she caught him watching her with an intensity that suggested his thoughts might be traveling similar paths to her own. But she could not be certain, and she was too cautious to risk everything by speaking first. October brought cooler weather and the first light snows dusting the peaks of the surrounding mountains. Lucas began preparing the ranch for winter, making repairs to buildings, and ensuring there was adequate feed stored for the cattle. Prudence worked on preserving the last of the garden harvest, filling jars with pickles and relish and drying herbs to last through the cold months ahead. One afternoon, Lucas came into the kitchen while Prudence was working on canning tomatoes. He looked troubled and she immediately set down her knife. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I need to make a trip into town for supplies before the weather turns bad," Lucas said. "But I'm also expecting the birth of several calves in the next few days, and I don't want to leave them unattended. Cows can have complications, especially first-time mothers, and I need to be here to help if something goes wrong." "Then I'll go into town for the supplies," Prudence said immediately. "Just give me a list of what you need and I can handle it." Lucas frowned. "I don't know if that's a good idea. The trip is several hours and the weather could turn while you're gone." "I drove a loaded wagon 300 miles, Prudence reminded him. "I think I can manage a 10-mile round trip to Delta. Besides, you need those supplies and the cattle need you here. It's the practical solution." Lucas still looked uncertain, but finally he nodded. "All right. But take the lighter wagon and the fast team and promise me you'll head back at the first sign of bad weather. I'll write out the list, and I'm also giving you money to pick up anything else you think we might need. Your judgment has been excellent so far, and I trust you to make good decisions." The casual way he said he trusted her made Prudence's heart swell. She took the list and money he provided, bundled herself in a warm coat, and set out for town with the sky clear and bright above her. The journey was easy, and she found herself enjoying the independence of handling the trip alone. She had become stronger over the past months, her body adapting to the physical demands of ranch life, and managing the team felt effortless compared to her earlier struggles with the overloaded Conestoga. Delta was busy when she arrived, with people rushing to complete their own preparations for winter. Prudence worked through Lucas's list efficiently, purchasing flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition for his rifle, new tools to replace worn ones, and various other necessities. She also added several items she thought would be useful, including extra lantern oil, a new frying pan to replace the one with a crack forming in the handle, and a warm wool blanket. As she was loading the wagon, she heard someone call her name and turned to see a woman approaching. She was perhaps 30 years old, dressed in practical clothes, with kind eyes and a friendly smile. "You're Prudence Thorne, aren't you?" the woman said. "I heard about your arrival a few months ago. I'm Sarah Jennings. My husband and I own the mercantile." "It's nice to meet you," Prudence said, shaking the offered hand. "I wanted to tell you that I think what you're doing is admirable," Sarah said. "Working for Lucas Ortega, I mean. People talk, of course, but I know Lucas, and he's one of the most decent men in this territory. You could do far worse than working for him." "He's been very good to me," Prudence said carefully, unsure how much to reveal to this friendly stranger. Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think Lucas is sweet on you. I've seen the way he looks at you when you come into town together, like you're the most precious thing he's ever seen. And I've known Lucas for years. I've never seen him look at anyone else that way." Prudence felt her cheeks burn. "We have a working arrangement, nothing more." "For now, maybe," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "But mark my words, that man is going to ask you to marry him before winter is over, and when he does, I hope you'll say yes. You're good for him. He's been alone too long. Before Prudence could respond, Sarah patted her arm and hurried back to her store, leaving Prudence standing by the wagon with her mind whirling. Could it be true? Did Lucas have feelings for her that went beyond friendship and respect? The possibility made her simultaneously hopeful and terrified. She finished loading the wagon and started back toward the ranch, her thoughts too tangled to focus properly on the journey. The sky was beginning to cloud over, but she told herself she had plenty of time to make it home before any storm hit. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice when one of the wagon wheels hit a deep rut in the road, jarring her roughly and causing several items to shift in the bed. Prudence pulled the team to a stop and climbed down to check the load. Everything seemed secure, but when she examined the wheel that had hit the rut, she saw to her dismay that one of the spokes had cracked. The wheel would probably hold for the journey home if she was careful, but it was a concerning development. She climbed back onto the seat and started forward again, but this time she kept the team at a slower pace, mindful of the damaged wheel. The clouds continued to build overhead, growing darker and more threatening, and the wind began to pick up. Prudence urged the horses to move a bit faster despite her concerns about the wheel, increasingly anxious to reach the safety of the ranch before the storm broke. She was still 2 miles from home when the first fat snowflakes began to fall. Within minutes, the light snow had become a heavy downfall that reduced visibility dramatically. Prudence could barely see the road ahead, and she had to trust the horses to follow the familiar path. The cracked wheel was making ominous creaking sounds, but she did not dare stop now, not with a full storm developing around her. The ranch buildings finally emerged from the white curtain of snow, and Prudence had never been so relieved to see anything in her life. She guided the team toward the barn, and before she could even bring them to a complete stop, Lucas was there, appearing out of the storm with snow already clinging to his hair and shoulders. "Thank God," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been watching for you for the past hour, going out of my mind with worry." "I'm fine," Prudence assured him, though her hands were numb with cold and she was shaking from a combination of chill and delayed fear. "But the wheel is damaged. It hit a rut on the way back." "Forget the wheel," Lucas said, reaching up to help her down. His hands were strong on her waist, and he lifted her from the seat with easy strength. But instead of setting her on her feet, he held her for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I was so worried," he said again, softer this time. "When the storm started to come in and you weren't back yet, I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong. And I realized that if something happened to you, if I lost you, I would never forgive myself for letting you go alone." "Lucas," Prudence whispered, very aware that his hands were still on her waist and that they were standing very close together. "I know we agreed that this was just a working arrangement," Lucas continued, the words tumbling out as though he could not hold them back any longer. "But that's not how I feel anymore, Prudence. Maybe it never really was. From the moment I saw you standing in front of that general store, looking so strong and proud despite everything that had just happened, I felt something I'd never felt before. And every day since then, every conversation, every shared meal, every moment of working side by side has only made those feelings stronger." Prudence's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What kind of feelings?" She managed to ask, needing to hear him say it clearly. "I'm in love with you," Lucas said simply. "I love your strength and your intelligence and your kindness. I love the way you laugh at my jokes and the way you recite poetry while you're working in the garden. I love how you transformed my house into a real home, and I love the idea of spending every day for the rest of my life getting to know you better. I know it's soon, And I know this isn't the elegant courtship you deserve, but I cannot keep these feelings to myself any longer. I'm in love with you, Prudence Thorne, and I want to marry you. Not because of practical considerations or social expectations, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Tears were streaming down Prudence's face, freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. I love you too, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. I've been trying so hard not to feel this way, trying to maintain professional distance, but I can't help it, Lucas. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see the best in people. I love the life we've built together here, and I love the man you are. Lucas made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then he was kissing her, his cold lips warm with emotion against hers. Prudence kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months, her arms wrapping around his neck as he pulled her closer. Snow swirled around them, the storm forgotten in the joy of this moment, this declaration that transformed everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Prudence said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." They stood there for another moment, just holding each other in the falling snow, before practical considerations reasserted themselves. The horses needed to be unhitched and cared for, the supplies needed to be unloaded, and they both needed to get out of the storm before they froze. Working together with the ease of long practice, they took care of the team and brought the supplies into the house. Lucas examined the cracked wheel and declared it repairable, but said it would have to wait until after the storm passed. Once everything was secured, they retreated to the warmth of the house, where Prudence prepared hot coffee while Lucas built up the fire. They spent the rest of the evening planning their future, talking about everything from when they would marry to how they would expand the ranch to how many children they hoped to have. The storm raged outside, but inside the house was warm and bright with firelight and happiness. "I want to do this properly," Lucas said at one point. "I know we're already living under the same roof, but I want you to have a proper engagement and wedding. We should wait at least a few weeks, give you time to make a wedding dress and let people know so they can attend if they want." "I don't need a fancy wedding," Prudence protested. "I just need you." "I know you don't need it," Lucas said, "but I want to give it to you anyway. You deserve to have a wedding day you can look back on with happiness, not just a rushed ceremony born of scandal or necessity." Prudence felt her love for him deepen even further at his thoughtfulness. "All right," she agreed. "A proper engagement and wedding it is." The next morning dawned clear and cold, with several feet of new snow blanketing the ranch. Lucas had to dig a path from the house to the barn to tend the animals, and they spent the day catching up on chores that had been delayed by the storm. But everything felt different now, infused with a joy that made even the hardest work seem light. True to his word, Lucas insisted on observing proprieties during their engagement. He moved Prudence's belongings up to the loft, giving her more privacy and ensuring that there could be no question about their conduct before marriage. It was sweetly old-fashioned of him, and Prudence appreciated the gesture even as she found herself longing for the day when they would truly be husband and wife. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Delta, and the reaction was generally positive. Sarah Jennings was delighted and claimed credit for predicting the match. Thomas Whitley, Prudence heard through town gossip, had left Colorado entirely, moving back east after his ranch failed due to poor management. She felt a brief flash of sympathy for him, but was mostly just grateful that his rejection had opened the door for her to find true happiness with Lucas. Prudence spent her evenings working on her wedding dress, fashioning it from a beautiful cream-colored fabric, she had brought in the wagon from Pennsylvania. It was one of the last pieces her mother had purchased before her death, and using it for this purpose felt like having her mother's blessing on the marriage. She kept the design simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and a full skirt that would be practical enough to wear on special occasions even after the wedding. Lucas, meanwhile, was working on a surprise of his own. Prudence would catch him disappearing into the barn for hours at a time, and when she asked what he was doing, he would just smile mysteriously and tell her she would find out soon enough. His secretive behavior was endearing, and she found herself looking forward to whatever he had planned. They were married in early December on a crisp, cold day with brilliant sunshine glinting off the snow. The ceremony took place in the small church in Delta, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Prudence wore her cream-colored dress and carried a small bouquet of dried wildflowers that Lucas had surprised her with that morning, flowers he had gathered and preserved during the summer without her knowledge. Sarah Jennings stood up as her witness, and the ranch hand who occasionally helped Lucas with cattle drives stood for him. The ceremony itself was simple and moving. When Lucas took her hands and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his gray eyes locked on hers with absolute certainty. Prudence found herself crying again as she made her own promises, overcome with gratitude for the strange series of events that had brought her to this moment. "I never believed in fate before I met you," Lucas said during the reception that followed, holding her close as they danced in the church hall. "But how else can I explain the fact that Thomas Whitley rejected you at the exact moment I happened to be in town? If I had been delayed by even an hour, we might never have met. It seems like more than coincidence." "Perhaps it was fate," Prudence agreed, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Or perhaps it was my parents watching over me, making sure I ended up where I was meant to be. Either way, I'm grateful," Lucas murmured against her hair. "Every single day I'm grateful." They stayed at the reception until late afternoon, but eventually they made their excuses and headed back to the ranch, eager to begin their lives as husband and wife in the privacy of their own home. The sun was setting as they arrived, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink, and Prudence thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. "Close your eyes," Lucas said as he helped her down from the wagon. "I have a surprise for you." Prudence obliged, letting him guide her carefully across the snowy ground. She heard the creak of the barn door opening, and then Lucas was leading her inside. "All right, you can open them now." Prudence opened her eyes and gasped. The barn had been transformed. Lucas had built a beautiful wooden cradle, the craftsmanship exquisite, with delicate carvings of flowers and birds decorating the headboard. Beside it sat a rocking chair he had made to match, sized perfectly for her, and designed with the same loving attention to detail. And on the wall, he had installed shelves to hold her books, already loaded with the volumes from her collection and arranged in careful order. "Lucas," she breathed, moving closer to examine his work. "This is incredible. When did you have time to do all this?" "Late nights and early mornings," Lucas admitted. "I wanted you to know that I value everything you brought with you, not just your presence but all the pieces of your history and your family. The cradle is for the children I hope we'll have together, and the chair and shelves are for you, so you have comfortable places to read and rest. This barn will always have space for your treasures, Prudence. They're not burdens to be hidden away. They're valuable parts of what makes you who you are." Prudence turned to him with tears streaming down her face again. She seemed to be crying constantly these days, but they were tears of joy so profound she could not contain them. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" she asked. I ask myself the same question every day, Lucas said, pulling her into his arms. Now come, let's go into the house. It's our wedding night and I want to start our marriage properly. The months that followed were the happiest of Prudence's life. Winter settled in fully, bringing deep snows that sometimes kept them isolated at the ranch for days at a time, but she did not mind. She and Lucas created their own world within the walls of their home, filled with laughter and conversation, and a physical intimacy that was both thrilling and deeply comforting. Lucas was a generous and attentive husband, and Prudence found herself falling more deeply in love with him with each passing day. They worked together to manage the ranch through the winter, caring for the cattle and chickens, maintaining equipment, and planning for spring. Prudence discovered that she had a talent for managing the ranch's finances, and Lucas was happy to turn that responsibility over to her. She set up a bookkeeping system that tracked income and expenses carefully, allowing them to make informed decisions about future investments in livestock and equipment. In the evenings, they took turns reading aloud from Prudence's collection of books, introducing each other to favorite stories and authors. Lucas had a good reading voice, and Prudence loved to listen to him read while she worked on sewing projects or simply relaxed in the chair he had made for her. They discussed the books in depth, and Prudence was continually impressed by Lucas's insights and the thoughtful questions he raised. Spring came late that year, with snow lingering well into April, but when it finally arrived, it brought an explosion of life and growth. The cattle that had survived the winter were healthy and strong, and several of the cows Lucas had been worried about during the storm of Prudence's arrival gave birth to healthy calves without complications. The garden plot, enriched with manure from the barn, produced abundantly, and Prudence spent long hours tending vegetables and herbs that would feed them through the coming year. In early May, Prudence realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Lucas. When she finally shared the news one evening over dinner, she watched his face transform with joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly, reaching across the table to take her hands. "We're going to have a baby." "You made the cradle just in time," Prudence said, laughing at his expression of absolute delight. Lucas came around the table and knelt beside her chair, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for this gift, for agreeing to build a life with me, for everything." "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did," Prudence replied, stroking his dark hair. "Thank you for recognizing my strength when others only saw burdens. Thank you for loving me." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Prudence continued to work on the ranch as long as she was able, and Lucas became almost comically protective, constantly worrying that she was doing too much. But Prudence felt strong and healthy, glowing with the satisfaction of carrying new life while watching the ranch continue to grow and prosper. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavier ranch work as Prudence's pregnancy advanced, and he proved to be a good worker, respectful and hardworking. With his help, Lucas was able to expand the herd significantly, purchasing additional cattle from a rancher who was retiring and moving back east. In December, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Prudence went into labor. Lucas rode frantically into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered dozens of babies in Delta and the surrounding area. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Prudence wondered if she would survive. But Lucas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her, and finally, as dawn broke on the second day, their son was born. They named him Daniel Thomas Ortega. Daniel for Lucas's father and Thomas not for Prudence's rejected suitor, but for her own father who had been named Thomas as well. He was a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and his father's gray eyes, and Prudence thought he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, holding his son with a combination of confidence and terror that made Prudence smile despite her exhaustion. "Absolutely perfect. He looks like you," Prudence observed, noting the way Daniel's dark hair was already beginning to curl at the ends. "He has your determination," Lucas said. "I could tell from the way he fought to get into this world. He's going to be strong and stubborn and absolutely unstoppable, just like his mother." The first few months with a newborn were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Prudence had read books about infant care, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of being responsible for such a tiny, demanding human being. Lucas was a devoted father, walking Daniel for hours when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and getting up for nighttime feedings even though Prudence was nursing, and he could not actually feed the baby himself. "I can at least keep you company," he said when Prudence protested that he needed his sleep. "And I can bring you water and make sure you're comfortable. Besides, I don't want to miss any of this. He's only going to be this small once." As Daniel grew from a newborn into an infant and then a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Lucas's careful management and Prudence's financial acumen proved to be an excellent combination, and they were able to expand their operations steadily. They added more land to their holdings, purchased additional cattle, and improved the existing buildings. The barn that had once held Prudence's wagon and belongings was now a bustling center of ranch operations, with equipment and supplies carefully organized and maintained. When Daniel was 2 years old, Prudence discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less surprised and more prepared for what lay ahead. Their daughter was born in October of 1880, arriving quickly and with far less drama than Daniel's birth. They named her Catherine Rose, and she had her mother's auburn hair and her father's calm temperament. "Our family is complete," Lucas said, holding Catherine while Daniel climbed onto the bed beside Prudence, eager to see his new sister. "2 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and the love of my life by my side. I could not ask for anything more." But life continued to bring blessings. Over the next decade, the Ortega Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Lucas gained a reputation as a fair employer and skilled rancher, and Prudence became known for her intelligence and business sense. They were respected members of the community, active in church and civic affairs, and their children grew up healthy and happy. Daniel proved to be a natural cowboy, following his father around the ranch from the time he could walk and learning everything Lucas could teach him about horses and cattle. Catherine inherited her mother's love of books and spent hours in the barn reading from Prudence's collection, though she also surprised everyone by developing a talent for training horses that rivaled her father's skill. When Daniel turned 16, Lucas began formally teaching him the business side of ranching, preparing him to eventually take over the operations. Catherine, at 14, announced her intention to become a teacher like her grandmother had been, and Prudence and Lucas worked to ensure she would have the education necessary to achieve that goal. In 1893, when Prudence was 38 and Lucas was 41, they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Their children had grown into capable young adults. The ranch was more successful than they had ever dreamed possible, and they were still as deeply in love as they had been on that snowy day in Delta when Lucas had first declared his feelings. "You ever regret it?" Prudence asked as they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over land that now extended as far as they could see. Taking a chance on a stranger who arrived with a wagon too heavy to marry, Lucas pulled her closer, his arm warm around her shoulders. "I have never regretted a single moment," he said. "You were never a burden, Prudence. You were always a gift from that very first day. The wagon wasn't too heavy. It was proof that you were strong enough for this life, strong enough to build something meaningful, strong enough to be my partner in every sense of the word." "You changed my life that day," Prudence said softly. "You saw value where others saw only problems. You offered me hope when I had none. You loved me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. And you gave me a home and a family and a purpose beyond mere survival," Lucas replied. "You brought books and beauty and laughter into my life. You challenged me to be better, to think deeper, to feel more fully. Every good thing I have is because you agreed to take a chance on a cowboy who was impertinent enough to interrupt your disaster of a wedding day." Prudence laughed at that characterization, though it was essentially accurate. "I'm glad you were impertinent. I'm glad you saw past the wagon to the woman driving it. I'm glad you had the courage to offer an alternative when everyone else was content to watch me fail. I'm glad you had the courage to accept," Lucas said. "That took just as much bravery as anything I did." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of Catherine playing the piano they had purchased when she turned 12, her music floating out through the open windows to blend with the evening songs of birds settling in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Daniel working with the horses, his voice low and soothing as he gentled a new mare. "Tell me truly," Lucas said after a while, "if you could go back and change anything about how we met, would you?" Prudence considered the question carefully. She thought about the humiliation of that day in Delta, the fear and uncertainty she had felt, the sting of Thomas Whitley's rejection. But then she thought about everything that had followed, the life she and Lucas had built together, the love that had grown between them, the family they had created. If she changed even the smallest detail of that day, the entire trajectory of her life might have been different. She might never have ended up with Lucas, might never have known this particular joy. "I wouldn't change a single thing," she said finally. "Not the heavy wagon, not Thomas's rejection, not even the public humiliation. Because all of it led to you, and you are worth every moment of pain and fear I experienced along the way." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple, his lips warm against her skin. "That's how I feel about every hardship I faced before meeting you. All of it, the loneliness and the prejudice and the years of struggling to prove myself. It was all worth it because it brought me to that moment in front of the general store, when I saw a strong woman refusing to be defeated by circumstances beyond her control." As the years continued to pass, Prudence and Lucas had the satisfaction of watching their children grow into remarkable adults. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and together they took over the day-to-day operations of the Ortega ranch, allowing Lucas and Prudence to step back slightly from the constant demands of ranch work. Catherine achieved her dream of becoming a teacher, taking a position at the school in Delta, where she taught reading and mathematics to children whose parents trusted her intelligence and dedication. Both children gave Prudence and Lucas grandchildren, filling their later years with the joy of watching a new generation grow and learn. The house that had once felt spacious became filled with noise and laughter during family gatherings, with children running through rooms where Prudence's carefully preserved family furniture still stood and playing in the barn, where her father's tools were now used by Daniel to maintain and expand the ranch operations. The books that Prudence had brought in her heavy wagon, The volumes that had seemed like impractical luxuries to Thomas Whitley became a lending library for the community. Ranchers and their families would stop by to borrow texts on agriculture and animal husbandry. Women would check out novels and poetry collections, and children like Catherine's students would come to expand their educations beyond what their one-room schoolhouse could provide. The collection grew over the years as Prudence and Lucas purchased new volumes, and it became a point of pride for them that they could provide this resource to their neighbors. The furniture that had filled the wagon, the pieces Thomas had seen as burdens, furnished not only the Ortega home but eventually the homes of their children as well. Daniel's wife treasured the carved rocking chair that had belonged to Prudence's mother, using it to rock her own children just as Prudence had done. Catherine took the writing desk that had been in Prudence's family for 3 generations, using it to prepare her lesson plans and write letters to students who had moved away. The tools that Prudence's father had made, the implements of his furniture building trade, were put to good use by Lucas and Daniel as they expanded and improved the ranch. Barns were built and repaired using techniques Prudence remembered her father teaching her as a child, techniques she passed on to her husband who in turn taught their son. The craftsmanship that characterized the Ortega ranch buildings became legendary in the region, and other ranchers would ask Lucas for advice on construction projects, never knowing that much of his knowledge had come from his wife's careful memory of her father's work. The seeds and fabric and household goods that had taken up space in the wagon all found their purposes as well. The garden at the Ortega ranch produced abundantly year after year, its success built on the foundation of those carefully chosen seeds Prudence had brought from Pennsylvania. The fabric became clothing and quilts and curtains that added warmth and beauty to their home. The dishes and cooking implements were used daily, each piece carrying memories of Prudence's mother and the home she had maintained with such care. In 1907, when Prudence was 52 and Lucas was 55, they made a journey back to Pennsylvania. Daniel was fully capable of managing the ranch in their absence, and they wanted to visit the graves of Prudence's parents, to pay respects and share stories of the life their daughter had built in the West. Standing in the small cemetery where her parents were buried, Prudence felt the past and present merge in a way that was both painful and healing. "I hope they would be proud of what I've done," she said, placing flowers on the graves. "I hope they would approve of the life I've built and the man I married." "They would be immensely proud," Lucas assured her, his hand warm on her shoulder. "You honored their memory by treasuring the things they left behind, but you also honored it by building something new and beautiful. You didn't let grief and loss define you. You took what they gave you and used it to create a future." On the journey back to Colorado, they talked about everything that had changed since Prudence had first made this trip 30 years earlier. The West was no longer quite so wild, with railroads connecting towns and telegraph lines carrying messages across distances that had once required weeks of travel. But the fundamental spirit of the place remained the same, that sense of possibility and new beginnings that had drawn Prudence west in the first place. "You ever miss Pennsylvania?" Lucas asked as they watched the landscape roll past the train windows. "I miss my parents," Prudence admitted. "And I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if they had lived. But I don't miss Pennsylvania itself. Colorado is my home now. The ranch is my home. Wherever you are is my home, Lucas." "That's how I feel too," Lucas said. "Home isn't a place for me anymore. It's you and the life we've built together." As they grew older, Prudence and Lucas made a point of recording their story for their grandchildren. On winter evenings, with children gathered around the fireplace, they would tell about the day they met, about the wagon that was too heavy to marry and the cowboy who saw strength where others saw only burden. The story became a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that value is not determined by conventional expectations, and that true strength comes in many forms. Prudence would always remember the moment Lucas had stepped forward in front of the general store in Delta, risking public opinion to offer an alternative to a desperate stranger. She would remember the way he had looked at her, really seen her, when everyone else was focused on the loaded wagon. And she would remember his words, the simple declaration that if she was strong enough to drive that wagon, she was strong enough for frontier life. Those words had changed everything. They had given her hope when she had none, had validated her strength when it was being dismissed, and had opened the door to a love deeper and more genuine than she had ever imagined possible. In the decades since, she and Lucas had built a life that honored both the past she had carried with her and the future they had created together. The ranch that had started as Lucas's small homestead grew into a substantial operation that would support generations of their family. The belongings that had filled Prudence's wagon found homes and purposes, becoming integral parts of the family legacy. The love that had sparked between a rejected mail-order bride and a cowboy who saw her value matured into a partnership that served as a model for their children and grandchildren. Catherine would later say that her parents' relationship taught her the most important lesson of her teaching career, that every student had value even if it wasn't immediately apparent, and that taking time to truly see people was the greatest gift anyone could offer. Daniel would credit his father's example of recognizing and honoring his mother's contributions as the foundation of his own successful marriage, teaching him to view his wife as a true partner, rather than simply someone who managed the household while he handled the important work. The community that had witnessed Prudence's humiliation that day in Delta also witnessed the remarkable partnership she and Lucas built. They became known as a couple who faced challenges together, made decisions collaboratively, and valued each other's strengths without ego or competition. Other couples would seek their advice on marriage and partnership, and Prudence and Lucas would always share the same basic wisdom. See each other clearly, value what each person brings to the relationship, and never let conventional expectations determine worth. In the spring of 1915, Lucas fell ill. It started as a persistent cough that he insisted was nothing to worry about, but it developed into pneumonia that left him weak and struggling to breathe. Prudence nursed him with all the skill and devotion she could muster, but she could see him growing weaker day by day. The doctor from town visited regularly, but could offer little beyond keeping Lucas comfortable. One evening, as Prudence sat beside his bed holding his hand, Lucas looked at her with eyes that were still sharp despite his physical weakness. "I need you to know," he said, his voice raspy but determined, "that every day with you has been a gift. Every single moment from that afternoon in front of the general store to right now, it has all been more than I ever dreamed possible." "Don't talk like this is goodbye," Prudence said, though tears were streaming down her face. "You're going to recover. You have to recover." "I hope so," Lucas said. "But just in case, I need you to know how grateful I am. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You loved me when I was just a cowboy with big dreams and limited prospects. You built this life with me, and it has been more beautiful than I could have imagined." "You're the one who gave me everything," Prudence protested. "You saved me when I had nothing. You saw value in me when no one else did. You loved me for who I was, not what you wanted me to be." "We saved each other," Lucas said simply. "That's what love does. We saw each other clearly and chose each other freely, and that made all the difference." Against all odds, Lucas did recover. It took months of careful nursing and rest, but gradually his strength returned. He was never quite as robust as he had been before the illness, but he was still himself, still the man Prudence had fallen in love with all those years ago. They both understood how close they had come to losing each other, and it made them treasure every moment together even more deeply. They lived to see their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own, creating a fourth generation connected to that original decision Lucas had made to step forward and offer an alternative. The Ortega Ranch remained a family operation, passed down and expanded with each generation, and Prudence's carefully transported possessions became family heirlooms with stories attached to each piece. When Prudence was 67 and Lucas was 70, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from across the territory. The celebration took place on the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and children running between buildings that had been constructed using knowledge gleaned from Prudence's memories of her father's craftsmanship. Music came from instruments including the piano that Catherine had learned to play and a violin that one of the grandchildren had taken up. During the party, Daniel stood to make a toast. "My parents taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect," he said, raising his glass. "It's about finding someone who sees your imperfections and loves you anyway, who recognizes your strengths and celebrates them, who stands beside you through every challenge and shares every joy. They taught me that a true partnership is built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. They showed me what it means to honor another person completely, and they did it all by example, by living their values every single day." Catherine added her own thoughts. "When I teach my students about courage, I always think of my mother driving that overloaded wagon 300 miles to meet a man she had never seen, and then having the courage to accept help from a stranger when her plans fell apart. And when I teach them about integrity, I think of my father stepping forward to defend someone he didn't know because he recognized that she was being treated unfairly. My parents' story is about so much more than romance. It's about having the courage to take risks and the wisdom to recognize value in unexpected places." Lucas stood then, his arm around Prudence, and addressed the gathered crowd. "50 years ago, I watched a woman climb down from a wagon that was supposedly too heavy to marry, and I saw something that everyone else had missed. I saw strength and determination and courage. I saw someone who valued family and history and knowledge enough to carry the weight of it across the country. I saw someone who didn't give up even when faced with public humiliation and an uncertain future. And I knew in that moment that she was exactly strong enough for this life, for any life, for the life we would build together." Prudence took the microphone from her husband, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "And I saw a man who was willing to risk social judgment to offer kindness to a stranger. I saw someone who understood that true wealth isn't measured in money or property, but in character and capability. I saw someone who looked past surface details to the person underneath. Lucas has told me many times that I was strong enough for this life, but the truth is that we were strong enough together. Everything we've built, we built as partners, valuing each other's contributions and supporting each other through every challenge." The party continued late into the evening, with children falling asleep in parents' arms and grandchildren dancing with great-grandchildren. As Prudence and Lucas watched their family celebrate, they both felt the same profound gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. They would live many more years together, growing old in the home they had created and the life they had built. When Lucas finally passed away at the age of 78, Prudence was holding his hand, and his last words were a repeat of what he had said to her that first day in Delta. "You're strong enough for this life," he whispered. "You always have been." Prudence lived another 5 years after Lucas's death, remaining active and engaged with her family and community. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by the possessions she had brought from Pennsylvania and the new treasures created through decades of life with Lucas. When she told stories to her great-great-grandchildren, they were always stories that featured Lucas prominently, keeping his memory alive and vibrant for new generations. When Prudence herself passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80, her children found among her effects a journal she had kept throughout her life. The first entry was dated the day she arrived in Delta, and it captured both the despair of Thomas Whitley's rejection and the astonishment of Lucas Ortega's intervention. "Today I was told that my wagon was too heavy to marry," she had written. "But a stranger said I was strong enough for this life. I think he might be right. I think I might be strong enough for anything." The last entry, written just days before her death, reflected on everything that had followed that pivotal day. "I have lived a good life, fuller and richer than I ever imagined possible. I was blessed with a husband who saw me clearly and loved me completely. I was blessed with children who inherited the best qualities of both their parents. I was blessed with a home that honored both where I came from and where I was going. The wagon that was supposedly too heavy to marry carried everything I needed to build a beautiful life, not just the physical possessions, but the values and memories and love that came with them." Lucas understood that, saw that, celebrated that. And for 58 years, he proved every single day that I was indeed strong enough for this life. The journal became another family treasure, passed down through generations as a reminder of where they came from and the values that had shaped their family. The story of Prudence and Lucas, of the wagon and the cowboy, of strength recognized and love freely given, became a cornerstone of family identity. The ranch itself continued to thrive, managed by descendants who honored the partnership model established by their ancestors. The buildings constructed using knowledge from Prudence's father's craftsmanship stood for generations, testament to the enduring value of skills and knowledge carefully preserved and passed on. The books from Prudence's collection, supplemented by hundreds more volumes purchased over the years, became a legitimate community library that served the region for decades. In the town of Delta, a historical marker was eventually placed near the site of the old general store, long since replaced by more modern buildings. The marker told the story of Prudence Thorne and Lucas Ortega, of a mail-order bride rejected, and a cowboy who recognized her worth. It became a popular spot for tourists and history enthusiasts, and the story was taught in local schools as an example of frontier courage and the power of seeing beyond conventional expectations. But the real legacy of Prudence and Lucas wasn't in markers or history books. It was in the lives of their descendants, in children who grew up knowing that strength comes in many forms, and that true partnership is built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. It was in marriages that honored both partners equally, in families that valued education and craftsmanship, in communities that understood the importance of seeing people clearly before judging them. The wagon that had been too heavy to marry turned out to carry exactly what was needed, not just for Prudence's survival, but for the building of a legacy that would span generations. And the cowboy who recognized her strength had been right in his assessment. Prudence Thorne had indeed been strong enough for frontier life, for partnership, for love, for everything that came her way. And together, she and Lucas had built something beautiful and enduring, a love story that started with a public rejection and became a testament to the power of seeing value where others see only burden, of recognizing strength where others see only difficulty, of offering hope where others see only problems. Their story proved that sometimes the heaviest loads carry the most valuable treasures, and that the right person will not see your strength as threatening, but as the exact quality that makes you perfect for the life you will build together. The wagon was never too heavy. It was simply waiting for someone strong enough to recognize that fact.